Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss one of my favorite topics, neurodiversity and advocacy and supporting the neurodivergent community. And I understand that there's been some scary stuff happening around you guys because of all the recent hurricanes. So I hope everyone is as well as they can be. And if you're like, who the heck are you? I will tell you, my name is Ryan Sutera. Um, before any occupational responsibilities, I am a clown and a fool in person and online to grab the attention of people so they'll listen, but also because I love it. And I am at Support the Spectrum on socials. Support the Spectrum is a resource for neurodiversity affirming care techniques and the science behind them. I'm, like all of you will be, speech language pathologist, and I graduated from Duquesne University in 2020. So I do have a vivid memory of what it's like to be in your shoes right now. And I feel like I have to say, hang in there, do your work, but also try to max out the amount of fun that you have for me, please. And yeah, so I graduated in 2020. As soon as I graduated, I worked as one of two autism support SLPs in an entire Delaware public school for 3 years. And after the school day, I would work in a clinic in order to gain more experience and sharpen my skills. So that I felt like gave me enough experience to start Support the Spectrum, where a majority of my clientele are autistic or individuals with ADHD or Gestalt language processors. And we're working on things like executive functioning, fluency, social emotional learning, and language acquisition. I also work for an in-home rehab company where I get to see the patients dealing with post-stroke cognitive decline, aphasia, dysphagia, things of that nature. And I work with early intervention services as well. So I get to see the little ones. And I'm also a cat mom. This is Travis. He's almost 7 years old and he's a star. So he has to be included. And it also was another C as I was making this presentation. And that's me, but that's boring. Let's move on to fun stuff and get into the agenda. So today we're going to start by reviewing the fundamentals of what it is to be a speech language pathologist and what it is to be neurodiversity affirming. Then we'll get into what you can expect from the various settings you'll choose to work in, which naturally leads to collaboration, how you'll work with others. And then we'll do a little case study, a no pressure case study. And if we have time, we'll talk a bit about the free resources I've attached to this presentation. But even if we don't have time to talk about them, you will get them. There's things I use all the time, and everyone likes free stuff. I think I see something in the chat. Let me see. Okay. All right. Let me get into fundamentals. Ooh, if I can. Okay. I want to start off by reviewing what our job actually is. So obviously the scope of practice for speech language pathologists is insane, right? The amount of paths, no matter what path you take in one way or another, you're going to be teaching people how to communicate, whether it's guiding language acquisition, teaching clients how to advocate for themselves, or how to talk through emotions, modifying stuttering, teaching breath support to increase intensity, starting an AAC journey, right? It could be literally anything like that, but something we need to reflect on is how did you learn to learn? Which can be kind of a weird question to ask yourself, but where educators fundamentally, and we're teaching others how to achieve goals within the scope of our practice. So we need to relate to our clients and think, how can I help this person learn? How did I learn? And the research shows us that structured activities that are not within the learner's interests take almost 3 times as many trials as symbolic interest-based activities. So most people learn faster when they're intrinsically motivated, when they feel rewarded just by doing the activity. So your therapy, no matter what kind of need that client has, should be play and interest-based, or interest-based if they're, an adult. When you show that learner that you care enough about them and their growth to individualize what they're learning to them, you've opened their brain, you've grasped their attention, you've nurtured their inner child, and you've done most of the legwork for rapport building. So that's a fundamental of how to structure neurodiversity affirming treatment. As you perform treatment, you have to be open to how the client responds. To me, I think of it kind of like improv. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with the kind of golden rule of improv, but it is yes and. So even if your learner didn't respond in a way that you were expecting, you accept it, you validate it, and then you can course correct after that. And when you accept multimodal responses, you validate them, you let people make mistakes, and model the target without expectation that they will robotically echo exactly what you did. You're guiding that learner to their goals instead of demanding it. And it will create a longer lasting effect on the brain. They won't be worried about meeting expectations or getting all 5 stars so that they can take a break, and then ultimately forgetting everything they learned in the session later. And speaking of later, you want to make sure that the treatment approaches you're implementing are not restrictive. So this means that they have accessibility to what they experienced in treatment outside of treatment. If you're using a visual or you're performing a sensory experience in treatment, try as best as you can to give them the same visual or item to them or the caregiver. We don't want to limit their experience with a preferred learning opportunity to once or twice a week for an hour. It's just not kind. So yeah, our true goal is to validate and promote authentic communication. I want everyone here to know that that is the root of what we do. And if it ever strays away from that, be very cautious. That's not to say that you won't have clients who have social goals of wanting to discuss things outside of their interests with others around them. That is definitely expected. We often have goals for ourselves that feel uncomfortable at first or might not even be something we're interested in, but we want to connect with a loved one or we want to make someone happy, and that's human and beautiful. But if it doesn't come from the client's perspective, be cautious of that. And then on the other hand, make sure that you're doing your research and trust yourself. If you don't feel well educated on a topic, educate yourself. There are so many free resources or inexpensive resources to better your craft. Whether you feel like you need to sharpen your skills with apraxia, executive functioning treatments, Gestalt language processing, persistent drive for autonomy, or general neurodiversity affirming practices, do that. Absorb all the information you can before presenting it to a caregiver or a client as fact. It seems kind of obvious to say that. I have a feeling that you guys know that, but the reason that I say it's so important is because when you actually start practicing, your skills will be questioned frequently, even with the best of intentions. When you're truly neurodiversity affirming, your approaches will be seen as radical. And if you're scared of confrontation and you're not confident in your approach, then it's the client that suffers. And that's really the truth. It's not an ego thing. It's not about being the person who's right. And it will be a delicate dance to defend evidence-based practices and neurodiversity affirming practices from people who have only ever been in the typical world their whole life. And they will believe that there's only one way to teach certain skills, but we know that every brain is different and deserves accommodations and peace of mind. So my number one piece of advice, and one of the things I'm putting on these slides first, is if something doesn't feel right, if something is compliance-based and is clearly making the client feel smaller, making the client feel like they just want to hurriedly get the session over and get their reward, rather than guiding them to the ultimate goal of authentic communication, you got to shut it down. There's always a way to be firm and kind, but just make sure you're being firm. On that note of education and research and fundamentals, let's talk about practices that are unacceptable when supporting the neurodivergent community and why they're unacceptable. Okay, non-neurodiversity affirming practices. A big one is deleting preferred language off of AAC systems or deleting words that the clients stem on. The reason we're not going to do this is because we have no right to tell people what they want to communicate. We have no right to tell neurodivergent people not to stim. It is needed as a regulatory practice. It's a way for them to communicate certain things. And it tells us a lot. It is a type of communication. We can know that a client is feeling dysregulated, or we can know they're really excited, or they're not feeling something that you're doing. It has a lot of valuable information. And so we're not going to stop them from doing that. Using too much language and not enough visual support is bombarding that learner and ultimately just hinders them from getting to the next step, getting to their goal, which, with a lot of neurodivergence, it is a processing thing, processing disorder, processing difficulties. And so you don't want to just keep trying to shove stuff into the brain. Back up, use a little less language, and make sure you have visual supports with you. Using hand-over-hand prompting is a no-go for so many reasons. It goes against bodily autonomy. It's basically telling someone, oh yeah, I can control what you want to say. I assume that I know what you want to say, you know, physically touching their body. No, no, no. And it also will hinder developing their motor plan. So you want to make it as independent of a process as possible. And that takes longer, right? It takes longer for them to get to the coordination, really, of developing that motor plan, but it's more long lasting and it's just better for that person. Not giving the learner enough processing time kind of goes into what we were talking about with a lot of neurodivergence being processing disorders, processing difficulties. You have to give them time. And I definitely recommend like at least 30 seconds per cue. So a lot of time is spent sitting and waiting in sessions, and that's okay because you're building up those neural pathways just by eliminating any other input. Taking away communication systems, not making them accessible to the learner, not charging them. They're all equally a bad offense that you see a lot. You see a lot of caregivers say, oh, well, I just didn't send the system with them into school that day, but it's fine. Like they don't need it. They know their routine. Or, well, I didn't want to take it to the bathroom with them. We were going to be right back. All those, excuses that in the moment you're like, okay, I understand why you thought that way, but it's not neurodiversity affirming. What if that person needed to say something? It's basically putting tape over their mouth, and we're not in the business of doing that. Restricting sensory regulation or sensory breaks, which I think also goes with making people earn their break time. If somebody needs a break, they need a break, right? We have to give them time to regulate, and we can't restrict that based on, oh, did you do this one thing I expected of you? Oh, you have to do 5 things that I expect of you before getting a break. You are only increasing anxiety and decreasing the ability to learn new things. So give people their breaks, of course. Yelling or using an aggressive tone, same deal. You're increasing the amount of anxiety, you're decreasing the amount of learning potential. So not a good practice. Ignoring visible signs of anxiety. This one's important because for a lot of neurodivergent people, signs of anxiety look differently than they would for a neurotypical person. A lot of my clients, when they're feeling anxious, will smile. And it is kind of like a rigid smile, I guess you could say, a tense smile. So there is a difference between the like genuine laughing smile and the smile that they do. But for someone who doesn't have a trained eye, they would think, oh, they're liking this experience. But really inside, they're like, ah, get me out of here. So just knowing your client helps with that. And if you do see visible signs of anxiety, change your approach. I feel like that's kind of obvious, but you need to say it sometimes. And then I put this last one in black bold because this is the one that we have direct control over, and there's nobody else, no other variables, I should say. So we need to know that writing goals that use words like eye contact, appropriate play, quiet hands, that kind of stuff is a no-go. And I do have an example of a language acquisition goal that I'm giving to you guys that is neurodiversity affirming, and you can just use that if you can't think of what to write for language acquisition. Okay. Let's move on to settings. You have the potential to treat neurodivergent people in any setting, since neurodivergent people are everywhere, right? But a majority of the time, you'll be dealing with these settings. One is the school, and the other is a clinic early intervention situation. And like everything, there are pros and cons, or what I called here, cool and chaotic things about each. So for school-based, you will be thrown into the deep end. Caseloads are big, needs are high, and if you're looking to develop skills quickly because you have to, this is cool. It's also a structured yearly schedule with set vacations and a structured daily schedule that gives you the opportunity to jump into an already planned activity and support language. You don't always have to have a plan. You can tag along to classroom activities a lot of the time, so that's definitely cool. Another great thing is you're so aware of your students' progress because you have the potential to see them every day. In clinics, you get to see your clients a few days a week at the most, and you have to rely heavily on caregiver feedback and rely on them tracking progress. But that's just not the case in schools when you have the potential to poke your head into each classroom and frequently meet with teachers and support staff. So the school is a good place to become a really good therapist really fast. Now, on the downside, goals will be oriented on how to encourage language learning and promote language growth within the confines of the school curriculum and environment. This seems obvious, but I found it frustrating because your time is not truly spent promoting individualized and authentic communication experiences. You can't always give students the language skills that they're hoping to get. You have to give them the language skills needed to get them through the school day functionally. And a lot of times you working in an environment where the teachers and paraprofessionals have not been taught how to support special needs students. They just haven't received the training. I mean, for myself, every year that I worked at this school, a new student or new teacher, sorry, would come who had never taught in an autism support classroom. And you, as someone who knows how to support autism and knows the fundamentals of the disorder, you would have to step in and teach them, right? Because you can't let the kids suffer. So a lot of time is spent educating others on top of guiding functional language acquisition and meeting mandatory time requirements for each student as detailed in their IEPs. So if you like a challenge, this job is for you. And let's move on to the clinic. Working in a clinic gives you a bit more freedom. It gives you more of a chance to introduce client-led therapy, and it gives you the space and time to give them the language skills for what they are interested in. In most clinics, you can make your own schedule. You can certainly do that in early intervention services. And with early intervention, you don't have to do assessments. They send you a list of potential clients. You say, hey, I'll take them. And they say, great. And they send you a completed evaluation with objectives to follow. It's all very cool. However, whether you're in a clinic, acute care, rehab hospitals, your pay is controlled by insurance companies. A lot of clinics are closing because insurance companies haven't increased the amount of money they give to these places in 5+ years. So that's just something to consider. And it might be different in Florida, honestly. For early intervention, your pay is controlled by the state. So it just depends what area you're in. So yeah, you get to make your own schedule, which means you have to schedule your own breaks, which sometimes can feel hard when you're guiding someone's speech and language development, but you have to do it. You have to give yourself time to reset, and you'll be a better therapist when you're back. And this last point depends a bit on your personality. I felt like clinic, early intervention, rehab work can be a little isolating. It can feel like your days are filled with treatment, caregiver education, and repeat. And then you're traveling between visits, stacking them back to back. It doesn't always give you much time to talk to other professionals, and doesn't give you as much time to socialize. So the school can be better with that, but it's not impossible. Okay, let's do a 180 from self-isolation and talk about collaboration. I think one of the most surprising things about this job is how much of your time is meeting with, educating, and attempting to convince caregivers. And this sounds bad. I hope that it doesn't scare anyone. But the truth is, our services should mostly be about the client. And yet, most of the time, that's just not the case. And it's about the caregivers. Most caregivers don't have a background in cognitive functioning and disability, so they don't know how to approach these very challenging and real life issues. So you will constantly be meeting with them, whether you're getting paid for it or not. And you have to do it because your clients need it. And in a lot of cases, your clients can't communicate what their goals are. So you have to base it a bit on the caregiver's goals for that client, but it doesn't have to be everything. And there is a balance, and you will find it. Then there's collaboration with other therapists. You could potentially be collaborating with other therapists often, and it is a really beautiful thing to be able to pair up with an OT or a PT and get active or do some really cool life skills things while also teaching them the language behind what they're doing and what they've achieved and whether they like it or they don't like it. It's really a beautiful thing. It makes planning more fun and social. And most of the time, your clients are like, what? Two of my fun people together? This is amazing. And this goes for BCBAs as well. There are so many fun, educated, amazing BCBAs, and behavior therapy is really powerful. So powerful that sometimes it bleeds into speech. So I just need you guys to remember that the only professionals that are able to create goals about communication and language, including actions and reactions around AAC, are speech language pathologists. If you ever see another professional trying to make goals related to language and communication, you got to shut it down. It might sound a little aggressive, but authentic communication comes from that person's personality and has nothing to do with compliance. So remember to advocate for them. And lastly, remember to collaborate with your community. There may be public spaces or events that can benefit from accommodations to make it more neurodivergent friendly. There are also foundations and companies who would love to hear feedback from you all. And you would be surprised by how many people are open to learning what you guys know. And yeah, I also want to hear what you guys know, which is why I have a little case study here, a no pressure case study. And let's see how much time. I think we can probably spend about 10 minutes on this. I'm gonna set a timer for 10 minutes and read the case study, kind of pick out the important parts, and list what you would do next, what your next steps would be in order of importance. And if you're brave, send it in the chat, but honestly, just writing it on the side is well and good. So don't worry about that. We'll just take one more minute to hypothesize a little bit, and then we'll talk about the case study more. Okay. Talia, I love what you said. You're definitely on the right track. So these are some parts that I've highlighted. I think these are the parts that really should stand out to you, and we'll talk about why. Okay, so if you said that some component of evaluation or language sample was first, yay, you did it. And based on his language history and results from informal and formal assessments, I would diagnose with receptive and expressive language disorder. Based on his melodic jargon and interests, as well as potentially multiple language samples, I would also potentially diagnose the client as a Gestalt language processor. Because he is responsive to visual forms of language, that sign language, I would recommend AAC and start the process of getting him that. And then I would write neurodiversity affirming goals to expand his communicative functions, since the only noted functions that we saw were him expressing requests for food and expressing distress. So we have to do all this writing and developing first. I feel like that's a given. But then what Talia said, which was perfect, is caregiver education. That has to come after all the writing and developing. We need to let the caregivers know. We need to gather evidence, we need to gather research, and we need to remember, like I said in the beginning, you have to be really confident in what your approach is and what you believe is going to be best for that client. The caregiver education is also really important because we need to let the caregivers know we will not be lying for you. It only hurts the client. He will get left behind if he doesn't have the supports that he needs. And he's responsive to visual language, so he needs AAC. And communication is through accepting multimodal communication, not forcing imitation. And the most important thing for him will be expanding his use of communicative functions so that he's understood in a bunch of contexts, and that will hopefully lessen any self-injurious behaviors and frustration. You would also potentially have to educate the caregivers on Gestalt language processing and what that even is, and explain that he's never received play-based treatment and how research shows us that is the fastest way to building authentic communication. So those were the things that were highlighted, and those would be your key points of educating the caregivers on, and also why you would choose to diagnose that way and develop the goals that way and write the evaluation report that way. Then the next few steps would just be about treatment. You would program that AAC with preferred language and sounds so that that language learner is actually interested in it. You're going to model language without expecting that learner to use the AAC, since, you're just starting out and they're in that learning phase. We model without expectations. We're going to do play-based, client-led treatment, which for him would probably include some big sensory experiences, songs, and videos. And then we would continue editing the AAC and taking language samples. This case study is kind of a mix of a bunch of clients that I have, and it's real life. It's real life stuff. There are a lot of cultures who believe disability to be a curse. There are a lot of people that I've worked with who refuse to tell their family that they have a neurodivergent loved one because they don't want to be pushed out of the family. It's stuff that I kind of wish was talked about when I was in school a little bit, because it could get really emotionally heavy. And you are navigating some really challenging conversations and understanding their perspective and trying not to come from a place of judgment. That's not our place, is to judge people. Our place is to just show the research and show what is best for that client. And it's a little easier to do because we have all this foundation of research to support the claims that we're making. So it's another reason why educating yourself and coming prepared is so, so important. It might bring that caregiver just a minute of peace, and that is also part of our job as well. And of course, the client piece as well. Okay, excellent stuff. I have resources here, a ton for supporting AAC. A lot of conversations are, I don't know, I think it'll inhibit their language progress and stuff like that. So I have all the resources to show that that is not true. Also, resources to support play-based client-led treatment, some resources on Gestalt language processing. This is a newer topic. It's not something I learned about in school. I had learned about it outside of school once I started really supporting autistic students. I was like, something is not right with how we're teaching language acquisition. And then as soon as I heard Marge Blanc speak, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is it. So these courses and this website in particular, Communication Development Center, is an amazing resource for other therapists who maybe don't know about it, for caregivers, especially because there's so much free stuff, free videos, free handouts. Yeah. Also linked, this is the goal that I was talking about, the neurodiversity affirming goal for language acquisition. So just to point out some key factors here. When we're talking about what the client is doing, it is highly motivating activities. That could be structured, it could be unstructured, but whatever that client is interested in. The word spontaneously, meaning there's no cues or supports given. This is truly independent. Multimodal, accepting all different types of communication. Then I have communicative function. You would like insert communicative function here. You're going to choose a communicative function that is emerging. So if we were talking about our case study, we have a learner who, when he is protesting something or when he is in distress, he's self-injuring, right? That, even though it is not a preferred behavior by any means, it is a way to communicate. And so what I would do, because it is something we don't want him to continue to do, is I would insert, during highly motivating activities, learner will spontaneously use at least X number of different multimodal utterances to protest or to express disinterest with their communication partners. And I'm choosing that communicative function because he's already doing it in some kind of way, but we're going to model healthier ways to do it. We're going to model ways that are not going to hurt him or others. And it's something that would be really achievable because he already understands the cause and effect of, I do this behavior and people stop doing something. So he already understands cause and effect of protesting with a behavior. We're going to teach him protesting with language. Hopefully that makes sense. We're going to have time for questions if it doesn't, but that's a goal I recommend using. Then we have a link to the best resource that I've ever used to get a speech generating device. It is so easy. You do have to write a report, of course, as a speech therapist. It's one of the easiest reports I've ever written. It's you quickly get a speech generating device to your client who needs it. Doesn't matter if they are a child, if they're 6 years old, they just give them. If they need them, they give them. And I do see something in the chat. Oh, okay. Hey, Taylor. Taylor says A. Okay. Then I just want to make it known that you can contact me whenever. I specialize in the following things. And yeah, please do. Pay what you can means literally give me $1. I don't care, or give me nothing, whatever. You guys are students. I understand. But if you need help with something, email me. I'm here. Did I link something else? Oh, okay, yeah, questions, if we have them.
I have a bit of a question. I feel like Gestalt language processing, I've been hearing about it so much recently, but I've never really seen anyone break it down yet. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain what it really is.
Sure. I mean, that in itself is a 3-hour lecture, but to keep it really simple, most people on Earth are analytic language processors, and they learn language one word at a time. If I'm a baby, I'm playing with a ball, my mom says ball, I learn ball. And then she says, yeah, it's a blue ball. Okay, this is blue ball. Have learned those 2 words and I'm building them up. And then as I keep gathering more words, I learn how to use them together, but I understand that each word has individual meaning. For Gestalt language processors, they learn language through phrases, songs, intonation-rich expressions. Like even something as simple as like, oh no, is so much more animated than saying no. And for whatever reason, their brains are more attuned to, they assimilate language that is melodic and intonation rich more than they learn language one word at a time. There is a theory, and it's just a theory that Marge Blanc has. She is the woman who did all the research for natural language acquisition for Gestalt language processors. And it when she explained it to me, it makes so much more sense. So I'm going to explain it to you guys, but just know that this is a theory. It's a hypothesis. There's no brain scans yet. But Marge has a theory that Gestalt language processors are born with right hemisphere language centers. So for us, for analytic language processors, just assuming you guys are analytic language processors, we typically have a left hemisphere language center, semantics, order, understanding each word has individual meaning. Gestalt language processors with their right hemisphere, they attach to abstract, melodic, artistic, musical language, and they have a vocabulary that has meaning to them that might not make sense to the people around them. So a common gestalt I see in a lot of my learners is they'll fall down, instead of being, my leg hurts, an analytic processor would be like, ow, boo-boo, hurt. A Gestalt language processor would say, are you okay? Because to them, every time they've had that experience of getting hurt, they've heard someone say, are you okay? And to them, that phrase means I'm hurt. Also, gestalts, which is the language that a Gestalt language processor has in their head, gestalts are almost always emotion-based. I have a learner who, I had a student when I was at the school who he's Spanish speaking at home. If he was at school and he missed his mom, he would sing an entire Spanish song, start to finish, perfect pitch. If you tried to join him, he said, stop. He hated it because they love pitch and they love things to be the exact way that they know them to be. So he didn't know how to say, I miss mom. Oh, I want to go home. He didn't know how to say those things. The only thing he knew was to sing that song. And to him, that's what that meant. So then they learn those big chunks of language first, and they have a meaning that maybe doesn't fit. And so you have to be a detective and figure out what that meaning is, apply it to the right context, over time, break it down into the individual words. And then they sort of become like analytic processors. They're able to learn each word has individual meaning, and you build it back up. It's kind of complicated. And if that's ever something that the program needs a presentation on, I offer that as well. But it takes a while to teach. I hope that just made sense.
Yeah, that was really cool. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, it's a complicated one, but really important if you're planning to work with the autistic community, especially. But anybody can be a Gestalt language processor. You don't have to be autistic. So it was lovely to do this. And like I said before, thank you for having me. And also, I did record this. So if anyone is like, girl, keep me out of your YouTube, let me know. I will, I will make sure your face is not in it.
Much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck, you guys.